Learning to Cook with Dad. A story-driven English original. Have you ever turned a kitchen disaster into a life-changing adventure? This heartwarming story about a father and son will not only improve your English, but might just inspire you to pick up a spatula. Subscribe now to Story-Driven English for more captivating stories that make learning English fun and meaningful. My name is Alex, and until last summer, I couldn't cook to save my life. At 20 years old, my culinary expertise extended to making toast, pouring cereal, and ordering takeout. My dad, on the other hand, was a cooking wizard. He could transform simple ingredients into mouth-watering meals that made our kitchen smell like heaven. Growing up, I never paid attention to what happened in the kitchen. I was always busy with video games, sports, or hanging out with friends. Why bother learning to cook, I would think, when there's always someone else who can do it for you? It wasn't until I moved into my first apartment that I realized how wrong I was. It was a Tuesday evening when reality hit me hard. I had just moved into my small apartment near the university campus. After a long day of classes, I opened my nearly empty refrigerator and stared at the pathetic contents. A half-empty bottle of ketchup, some butter, and a carton of milk that was definitely past its prime. My stomach growled loudly, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I guess it's takeout again, I sighed, reaching for my phone. But when I checked my bank account, my heart sank. After paying for textbooks, rent, and other expenses, I was nearly broke. Takeout wasn't an option anymore. I called my mom in desperation. "Mom, I'm starving and I don't know what to do," I admitted, feeling like a helpless child. She laughed sympathetically. "Oh, Alex, why don't you cook something?" "Cook? Me?" I almost dropped my phone. "I don't know how to cook anything." "Well," she said thoughtfully, "your father is coming to visit you this weekend. Why don't you ask him to teach you some basics?" The idea of my dad teaching me to cook seemed strange. We usually bonded over sports or movies, not kitchen activities. But desperate times call for desperate measures. "Okay," I agreed reluctantly. "I'll ask him." When my dad arrived that Saturday morning, he carried 2 enormous grocery bags. His face lit up when I mentioned wanting to learn how to cook. "Really?" he asked, his eyes wide with surprise. "You want me to teach you?" I nodded, trying to look more enthusiastic than I felt. "Yeah, I mean, I can't live on instant noodles forever, right?" Dad laughed and started unpacking the grocery bags. "We'll start with something simple. How about pasta with tomato sauce?" "Sounds easy enough," I replied, not knowing I was about to embark on a journey that would change our relationship forever. Dad handed me an apron that said "Kiss the Cook" in bright red letters. I raised an eyebrow. "Really, Dad? This apron?" "It's lucky," he insisted with a straight face. "Trust me, you need all the luck you can get in the kitchen." I rolled my eyes but put it on anyway. The kitchen in my apartment was tiny, barely enough room for one person, let alone 2. Dad and I kept bumping into each other as we moved around, which led to several laughing fits. "First lesson," Dad announced, holding up an onion like it was a precious gem, "is learning to chop without crying." "Is that even possible?" I asked skeptically. Absolutely. Dad handed me the onion and a knife. The secret is to not get emotionally attached to the onion. I burst out laughing. Dad, that's terrible advice. He grinned. Okay, the real secret is to breathe through your mouth, not your nose. And don't rub your eyes. I started chopping the onion, trying to follow Dad's instructions. Within seconds, my eyes were burning and tears were streaming down my face. I thought you said I wouldn't cry, I complained, wiping my eyes with my sleeve, which only made it worse. Dad was laughing so hard he had to lean against the counter. I said it was possible, not that you would manage it on your first try. Despite the tears, I continued chopping. The pieces were uneven and messy, but Dad nodded approvingly. Not bad for a first attempt. Now let's crush some garlic. For the next hour, Dad patiently showed me how to prepare a basic tomato sauce. He explained each step with such enthusiasm that I couldn't help but get caught up in it. There was something almost magical about the way he described the transformation of simple ingredients into something delicious. Cooking is like a science. Experiment that you can eat, he said as he showed me how to test if the pasta was cooked. You mix things together, add heat, and create something new. When we finally sat down to eat our pasta, I took my first bite cautiously. To my surprise, it was actually good. Not restaurant quality, but definitely better than instant noodles. We did it, I exclaimed, taking another bite. Dad shook his head. No, Alex, you did it. I just guided you. A warm feeling of pride spread through me. I had made something edible with my own hands. It was a small accomplishment, but it felt significant. So, Dad said, twirling pasta on his fork, same time next weekend? I nodded eagerly. Definitely. And just like that, our weekly cooking sessions began. Every Saturday, Dad would arrive with groceries, and we would spend the day cooking together. Sometimes the recipes were simple, like scrambled eggs or grilled cheese sandwiches. Other times, we attempted more complicated dishes like lasagna or chicken curry. Not all of our cooking adventures were successful. There was the infamous Great Pancake disaster, when I flipped a pancake with such enthusiasm that it stuck to the ceiling. Dad and I watched in horror as it slowly peeled off and landed on my head, covering me in sticky batter. Instead of getting angry, Dad laughed until tears ran down his face. Well, he managed to say between laughs, at least we know. The batter is sticky enough. Then there was the chili pepper incident, when Dad dared me to taste a tiny piece of a ghost pepper he had brought. Ignoring his warning to just touch it to my tongue, I popped the whole piece in my mouth. The next few minutes involved me running around the apartment, gulping down milk, and promising never to doubt my father's warnings again. But among these disasters were moments of genuine connection. As we chopped vegetables or stirred pots, Dad began sharing stories I'd never heard before. He told me about his own culinary disasters when he was learning to cook, about my grandmother's secret recipes, and about the first meal he cooked for my mother, a disastrous attempt at beef Wellington that somehow still won her heart. She married me despite the food poisoning, Dad joked. That's how I knew it was true love. One Saturday, about 2 months into our cooking lessons, Dad arrived with a mysterious wooden box instead of the usual grocery bags. "What's that?" I asked, peering at the box curiously. Dad placed it on the kitchen counter with care. "This," he said solemnly, "is our family recipe box. Your grandmother gave it to me when I moved out, and now I'm passing some of the recipes on to you." He opened the box to reveal dozens of handwritten recipe cards, yellowed with age. Some were in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, others in my grandfather's bold scrawl, and some even appeared to be from earlier generations. "These recipes tell our family's story," Dad explained. "This one," he pulled out a card for beef stew, "got your grandfather through the harsh winter of 1963. And this one," he selected another for apple pie, "has been made for every family celebration since before I was born." I felt a strange connection to these family members, some of whom I'd never met, through their recipes. It was like discovering a secret language that had been spoken in my family for generations. "Today," Dad announced, "we're making Grandma's famous chicken soup. She always said it could cure anything from a cold to a broken heart." The recipe seemed deceptively simple, but Dad insisted that the magic was in the details. "You have to add the parsley at exactly the right moment," he explained, watching the clock with intense concentration. 3 minutes before it's done, not a second more or less." As we worked on the soup, Dad shared more family stories. Some were funny, others touching. I began to see my father in a new light. He wasn't just Dad anymore. He was a person with a rich history, fears, and dreams of his own. "You know," he said quietly as we waited for the soup to simmer, "I was terrified when you were born. This startled me." "You were? But you always seemed to know exactly what to do." Dad laughed. "Are you kidding? I had no idea what I was doing. I was just making it up as I went along, hoping I wouldn't mess you up too badly." "Well, the jury's still out on that," I joked, but I was touched by his confession. "Parenting is a lot like cooking," Dad continued, stirring the soup thoughtfully. "You follow the basic recipe, but every child is different, so you have to adjust and adapt. And sometimes, despite your best efforts, things don't turn out as planned." "Like the pancake on the ceiling?" I suggested. Dad's eyes crinkled with laughter. "Exactly like the pancake on the ceiling." When we finally tasted Grandma's chicken soup, it was everything Dad had promised. Rich, fragrant, and somehow comforting, like a warm hug in a bowl. "This is amazing," I said between spoonfuls. "I can't believe I made this." "We made it together," Dad corrected me. "That's what makes it special." As our cooking sessions continued, I began experimenting on my own during the week. Not all of my solo attempts were successful. There was a particularly memorable spaghetti carbonara that resembled cement more than food, and a chocolate cake that could have been used as a hockey puck. But there were triumphs, too. The first time I successfully made an omelet without breaking it, I immediately called Dad to share the news. He acted as though I'd won an Olympic gold medal, his pride evident even through the phone. "Next week," Dad said during one of our sessions, "I'm not bringing groceries. You're going to plan the menu and shop for the ingredients yourself." The idea was terrifying. How would I know what to buy? How much would I need? What if I forgot something essential? You'll be fine, Dad assured me. Just make a list and check it twice. That week, I spent hours researching recipes, making lists, and fretting over quantities. I settled on a simple menu: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Classic comfort food that seemed hard to mess up. The grocery store, however, proved to be a battlefield I wasn't prepared for. Why were there so many types of potatoes? Which ones were best for mashing? And how big a chicken did I need for 2 people? I found myself calling Dad from the produce section, panic rising in my voice. Dad, there are like 15 different types of potatoes here. Which ones do I get? I could hear the smile in his voice as he calmly talked me through it. Look for Yukon Golds. They're perfect for mashing, not too starchy, not too waxy. By the time I finished shopping, I felt like I'd run a marathon, but I also felt a strange sense of accomplishment. I had successfully navigated the grocery store and emerged with, hopefully, the right ingredients. When Dad arrived that Saturday and saw my carefully arranged ingredients, he nodded approvingly. Well done. You've got everything we need. That day's cooking session was different. Instead of leading, Dad took a step back and let me take charge. He was there to offer advice when needed, but he made it clear that this was my show. The roast chicken was intimidating. Raw chicken looked alien and unappetizing, and the thought of handling it made me queasy. Dad showed me how to remove the giblets, a process that nearly made me vow to become vegetarian, and how to season under the skin for maximum flavor. The secret to a good roast chicken, Dad explained, is patience. You can't rush it. And always use a meat thermometer. Food poisoning is not a good way to remember a meal. As the chicken roasted in the oven, filling the apartment with an amazing aroma, I worked on the mashed potatoes. Dad watched as I peeled, boiled, and then mashed them with butter, milk, and a pinch of nutmeg. His secret ingredient. Not too much milk, he cautioned. You want them creamy, not soupy. When everything was finally ready, we set the table properly, with the nice plates I usually kept in the back of the cupboard. The chicken was golden and crispy on the outside, juicy on the inside. The mashed potatoes were smooth and creamy, and even the green beans had turned out well, still crisp and bright green. I propose a toast, Dad said, raising his glass. To the chef. I blushed but raised my glass too. And to the teacher. That meal marked a turning point. For the first time, I felt confident in the kitchen. I wasn't just following instructions anymore. I was beginning to understand the principles behind them. Our cooking sessions evolved over the next few months. We moved on to more complicated recipes, experimenting with cuisines from around the world. I learned to make Thai curry, Italian, risotto, Mexican enchiladas, and French crepes. Each dish came with new techniques to master and new stories from Dad. One rainy Saturday, Dad arrived looking unusually serious. I have a confession to make, he said, as he hung up his wet coat. What is it? I asked, concerned by his tone. He sighed dramatically. I've been holding back on you. There's one family recipe I haven't shared yet, the most important one. Which one? Dad smiled mysteriously. The famous Thompson family chocolate cake. It's been a closely guarded secret for generations. My eyes widened. I had heard about this legendary cake my entire life. It appeared at every family birthday and celebration, and it was universally acknowledged to be the best chocolate cake in existence. You're going to teach me how to make it? I couldn't believe it. Dad nodded solemnly. I am. But you must promise never to reveal the secret ingredient to anyone outside the family. I placed my hand over my heart. I promise. Dad proceeded to take out ingredients: flour, sugar, cocoa powder, eggs, and butter. All standard cake ingredients. But then he pulled out a small vial from his pocket with a flourish. The secret ingredient, he whispered dramatically. I leaned closer, expecting some exotic spice or rare extract. Dad unscrewed the vial and let me sniff it. It smells like vanilla? I said, confused. Dad burst out laughing. It is vanilla. Regular store-bought vanilla extract. I stared at him in disbelief. But I thought there was some magical secret ingredient. The real secret, Dad explained, still chuckling, is not in the ingredients, but in the technique, and in letting people think there's a secret ingredient. The mystery makes it taste better. As we made the cake together, Dad showed me the true secrets, beating the butter and sugar for exactly 7 minutes to incorporate air, sifting the dry ingredients 3 times for lightness, and adding a tiny pinch of salt to enhance the chocolate flavor. None of these were revolutionary techniques, but the attention to detail did make a difference. When the cake was done, it looked and smelled exactly like the legendary dessert I remembered from my childhood. Dad watched expectantly as I took my first bite. Well, he asked, does it live up to the legend? It was perfect, moist, rich, and intensely chocolatey. It's even better, I said honestly, because I know how to make it now. Dad smiled, looking both proud and a little wistful. Now you know all my culinary secrets. That evening, as we enjoyed slices of chocolate cake with coffee, Dad asked me a question that caught me off guard. What's the most important thing you've learned from our cooking sessions? I thought about it for a moment. Was it how to chop an onion without crying? How to test pasta for doneness? The perfect temperature for roasting chicken? Patience, I finally answered. Cooking has taught me to slow down and appreciate the process, not just the result. Dad nodded, looking pleased. That's a good one. Anything else? Communication, I added, thinking about all the stories we had shared. I've learned more about you in these few months than in my entire life before. Dad's eyes grew misty. That goes both ways, son. I realized then that our cooking sessions had never really been about the food. They were about connection, about finding a common language when words alone weren't enough. Every chopped vegetable, every stirred pot, every shared meal had been building a bridge between us. As winter turned to spring, an unexpected opportunity arose. My university was hosting a family recipes competition as part of a cultural exchange event. Students were invited to submit a dish that represented their family heritage, along with the story behind it. You should enter, Dad suggested immediately when I mentioned it. What would I make? I wondered aloud. Dad thought for a moment. What dish means the most to you now? Without hesitation, I knew the answer. Grandma's chicken soup. The soup that had started our journey into family recipes. The one that Dad said could cure anything from a cold to a broken heart. It seemed fitting. In the weeks leading up to the competition, Dad and I refined the recipe. We debated the perfect amount of parsley, whether to add extra carrots, and if the noodles should be homemade or store-bought. These discussions often led to playful arguments that usually ended with us calling Grandma for her opinion. "You boys are overthinking it," she said, chuckling. "The secret isn't in the ingredients, it's in the love you put into it." It sounded cheesy, but I was beginning to think she was right. The day of the competition arrived, and my tiny kitchen became a bustling command center. Dad acted as my sous chef, following my instructions without question. A reversal of our usual roles that wasn't lost on either of us. "More salt?" he asked, holding up the salt cellar. I tasted the broth thoughtfully. "No, it's perfect as it is." The competition was held in the university's main hall, transformed for the day into a massive dining area with dozens of cooking stations. Students from all over the world were preparing dishes that represented their cultural heritage. The air was filled with a symphony of aromas, spicy, sweet, savory, and everything in between. I set up my station, arranged my ingredients neatly, and began to cook. Dad watched from a distance, giving me encouraging nods but never interfering. This was my moment. As I worked, I found myself sharing stories with the competitors at the adjacent stations. About my grandmother, about the winter of 1963, about how this soup had been a constant presence at family gatherings through good times and bad. The more I talked, the more I realized how much these stories meant to me now. When the judges came to my station, I served them steaming bowls of chicken soup, garnished with fresh parsley and accompanied by slices of crusty bread. "This is my grandmother's chicken soup," I explained. "In our family, we believe it can cure anything from a cold to a broken heart." The judges took their time tasting, nodding appreciatively. One of them, an elderly woman with kind eyes, looked up at me. "It reminds me of my own mother's soup," she said softly. "Food has a way of connecting us across time, doesn't it?" I nodded, thinking of all the generations of my family who had made this same soup. "That's exactly what I've learned." I didn't win the competition. That honor went to a student who prepared his great-grandmother's biryani, a dish with a story that spanned 3 countries and 4 generations. But I did receive an honorable mention, and more importantly, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. "I'm proud of you," Dad said as we packed up my cooking equipment. "Not just for the cooking, but for sharing our family's story. I couldn't have done it without you," I replied honestly. That night, Dad and I celebrated with takeout pizza, an ironic choice that wasn't lost on either of us. As we ate, I realized how much had changed since that desperate phone call to my mom just a few months ago. "You know," Dad said thoughtfully, "I always wanted to teach you to cook, but I never knew how to bring it up. You seemed so uninterested in anything related to the kitchen." "I was," I admitted. I didn't see the point. Cooking was just a means to an end, something you did to avoid being hungry. Dad nodded, understanding. And now? I thought about the question carefully. Now I see that it's so much more than that. It's creativity and science and history all rolled into one. It's a way to connect with people across time and space. And, I added with a smile, it's a lot cheaper than ordering takeout every night. Dad laughed. That it is. As summer approached, our weekly cooking sessions continued, but with a new dynamic. Sometimes I would teach Dad a recipe I had discovered or modified. Other times, we would experiment together, creating new dishes that might someday become family traditions of their own. One evening, as we cleaned up after making a spectacular seafood paella, Dad handed me a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a beautiful wooden box, smaller than the family recipe box, but crafted with the same attention to detail. Dad had carved my name on the lid. "Your own recipe box," he explained, "for the new traditions you'll create." Inside the box was a stack of blank recipe cards, and a few that Dad had already filled out. The recipes we had cooked together over the past months, written in his familiar handwriting. I was speechless, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thanks, Dad. This means a lot." He squeezed my shoulder. "The kitchen will always be a place where we can find each other, even when life gets busy." And he was right. In the years that followed, no matter where life took us, we always found our way back to the kitchen. Through college graduations, new jobs, and eventually my own family, our cooking sessions remained a constant. The skills Dad taught me proved invaluable in countless ways. When I wanted to impress a date, I made risotto. When I needed to comfort a friend going through a breakup, I made Grandma's chicken soup. When I celebrated professional achievements, I made the famous Thompson family chocolate cake. But the most valuable lesson wasn't about food at all. It was about finding connections in unexpected places and building bridges across generations. It was about the stories we tell through the meals we share and the traditions we pass down. Every time I step into the kitchen now, I feel my father beside me, guiding my hands and sharing his wisdom. And someday, I hope to pass these lessons on to my own children, keeping our family story alive one recipe at a time. Key vocabulary. Repeated throughout. Culinary. Relating to cooking or the kitchen. Ingredients. Items used to make a dish recipe. Instructions for preparing a dish simmer. To cook just below boiling point chop. To cut into pieces garnish. To decorate food before serving aroma, pleasing smell. Especially of food season, to add flavoring, usually salt and pepper technique. A particular way of doing something, stir. To mix with a circular motion, knead. To work and press dough with hands measure. To determine the quantity of ingredients, boil. To cook in water at 100 °C, 212 bake. To cook in an oven grill. To cook under or over direct heat sauté. To cook quickly in a little hot fat marinade. To soak food in a flavored liquid whisk. To beat ingredients with a wire, tool dice. To cut into small cubes, mince. To cut into very small pieces. Did you enjoy this heartwarming story about Alex and his dad? Learning English is easier when it connects with your emotions. Like this video, share it with friends who are learning English, and don't forget to leave a comment telling us about your favorite family recipe. Subscribe to Story-Driven English for more captivating stories that make learning fun. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our new uploads. Remember, the best way to master English is through stories you can relate to.